The last thing I saw before hitting the water was my daughter-in-law's smile. One second, I was standing beside the pool at my son's wedding reception. The next, Courtney's hands struck my back, and cold water closed over my head. My injured shoulder screamed the moment I tried to pull myself up. Guests rushed toward the edge. Courtney just laughed. It was just a joke. She knew about my torn shoulder. She knew because I had injured it 6 weeks earlier while working on the duplex I planned to give her and my son as a wedding gift. Then Tyler walked over. For one foolish second, I expected my son to help me. Instead, he looked down at his soaked 68-year-old father and said, "Dad, don't ruin our wedding. Just get out and let it go." Something inside me went very quiet. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten anybody. I changed clothes, took the small brass key from the wedding envelope in my jacket, and drove away. Before the real estate attorney's office closed that afternoon, I made one phone call. 2 hours later, while the reception was still going on, Tyler called me. His voice didn't sound angry anymore. It sounded scared. "Dad, what did you do?" At the time, I thought I had only canceled a wedding gift. I had no idea my son and his new wife had already promised my property, my reputation, and even my future labor to other people without ever asking me. And when I finally discovered how far they had gone, that shove into the pool turned out to be the smallest betrayal of all. My name is William Hartley, though most people have called me Bill for as long as I can remember. I was 68 years old, a retired residential contractor who had spent more than 35 years building houses, fixing other people's mistakes, and making sure a job was finished properly before I put my name on it. I had been a widower for 4 years, and after Diane died, my son Tyler became the last piece of the family I had built my life around. To understand why that one phone call changed everything, you need to know what that afternoon looked like before Courtney put her hands on me. I had arrived at my son's wedding determined to smile through the pain in my right shoulder and give Tyler the kind of day a father hopes his son will remember for the right reasons. The ceremony had been beautiful. I could admit that much. White chairs had been arranged beneath old oak trees behind the country club. Courtney had chosen pale flowers, strings of lights, and enough white linen to cover half of Wake County. Tyler looked nervous before the ceremony, but when he saw Courtney walking toward him, his whole face changed. For a little while, I forgot the ache beneath my jacket. I forgot the physical therapist telling me not to make sudden movements. I forgot that I had taken 2 pain relievers before leaving home. I was simply watching my boy get married. Maybe that was why I ignored Courtney's first few remarks. She walked past me during the reception and tapped the sleeve covering my shoulder support. "You're still wearing that thing?" I smiled. "Doctor's orders." She looked toward the photographer. "Can you keep it under the jacket for pictures? It makes you look like you just got out of the hospital." Her bridesmaids laughed. Not cruelly, exactly. More the polite laughter people give a bride because it is her day and nobody wants to spoil the mood. I laughed too. That had become a habit of mine. If something hurt, I smiled before anyone had to feel uncomfortable about it. A little later, I was standing near the pool talking with one of Tyler's old college friends. My shoulder had started throbbing, so I held my right arm close to my side without thinking about it. Courtney came up behind us with 2 bridesmaids. "You've been serious all afternoon, Bill." "I'm having a good time. You look like you're inspecting the place." "I spent 35 years inspecting houses. Hard habit to break." She laughed. Then she said, "Maybe you need to loosen up." I turned halfway toward her. That was when both of her hands hit my back. There was no warning. My heels slipped against the stone. For one strange second, I saw blue water below me and heard someone gasp. Then I went in. Cold water rushed over my head. My shoulder twisted as I tried to turn, and pain shot from the joint down my arm hard enough to empty my lungs. I kicked toward the surface. When my head came up, people were shouting. I reached for the edge with my left hand. My right arm barely wanted to move. Someone grabbed my jacket. Another man caught my wrist. They pulled me toward the steps. And over all that noise, I heard Courtney laughing. It was just a joke. I got one knee onto the step. Water poured from my suit. My shoulder burned so badly I had to stop before standing. "Bill, are you okay?" somebody asked. I nodded because that was easier than explaining. Then I looked for Tyler. He was coming across the patio. For one second, relief went through me. My son had seen enough. He would understand. He stopped a few feet away. His eyes moved from me to Courtney, then toward the guests watching us. I waited for him to ask about my shoulder. He didn't. "Dad," he said quietly, "don't ruin our wedding." I stared at him. "What?" Just get out and let it go. Courtney stood behind him with one hand over her mouth, still smiling, as if we were all supposed to laugh together once I caught my breath. Tyler lowered his voice. Please. Not today. Something in me went still. Not angry. Not yet. Just still. I had spent years thinking silence was the price of keeping a family together. That afternoon, for the first time, silence felt like something else. A choice. I stood slowly. My right arm stayed tight against my side. I need to change. Tyler exhaled like I had finally become reasonable. Okay, good. That bothered me more than if he had shouted. I walked into the clubhouse without saying another word. Someone from the staff found me towels and showed me to a small changing room. I had brought spare clothes because Courtney had asked everyone in the immediate family to have something comfortable for later in the evening. My hands were shaking while I changed, partly from cold, partly from pain. I took off the soaked jacket and laid it over a chair. When I reached into the inside pocket, my fingers touched a small cream-colored envelope. I had almost forgotten it was there. Inside was a new brass key I had cut for the duplex. Tyler still had an old spare I had given him for renovation work, but this one was different. It was supposed to be symbolic, the key I would hand my son when the property truly became his. Not the deed itself. That appointment was scheduled for Monday. I held it in my palm for a long moment. Then I put it back in the envelope. I changed into dry clothes, folded the wet suit as best I could, and walked out through a side entrance. Nobody stopped me. That told me more than I wanted to know. I sat in my truck with the engine off and looked at the dashboard clock. The real estate attorney's office would still be open. I took out my phone. The receptionist recognized my name. I need to cancel Monday's appointment, I said. There was a pause. The deed transfer? Yes. Would you like to reschedule? I looked at the cream envelope on the passenger seat. No. She asked whether there was a problem. I thought about Courtney's laugh. I thought about Tyler looking down at me and worrying about his wedding, instead of whether his father could move his arm. No problem, I said. I just won't be transferring the property. I ended the call, started the truck, and drove home. I didn't call Tyler. I didn't call Courtney. I didn't send an angry message to anybody. For the first time in years, I let a decision stand without explaining it. 2 hours later, my phone rang. Tyler, I answered. For once, my son didn't sound annoyed. He sounded frightened. Dad, he said, what did you do? Tyler's question stayed with me long after I ended the call. I hadn't told Tyler myself. I assumed the attorney's office had notified everyone scheduled for Monday, but what bothered me was how quickly he had panicked. Canceling an appointment should have made him angry. It shouldn't have made him afraid. I told myself I would think about that later. My shoulder came first. By the time I reached urgent care, the ache had settled into a deep pulse that ran from the joint into my upper arm. The nurse asked what happened, and I gave her the shortest version possible. I fell into a pool. That was easier than saying my daughter-in-law pushed me at my son's wedding while half the reception watched. The doctor examined the shoulder, compared my range of motion to the notes from my earlier injury, and told me the good news first. I had aggravated the rotator cuff, but nothing suggested a new tear or fracture. Rest it, ice it, keep the follow-up appointment, call if the weakness or pain got worse. I thanked him. Then I sat in my truck outside the clinic for almost 10 minutes without turning the key. Diane would have hated that. She never let me sit around pretending pain would disappear if I ignored it long enough. Bill, your body is not one of your job sites, she used to say. You don't get to keep working until something collapses. 4 years without her, and I could still hear exactly where she would have put the emphasis. That was the worst part of losing a spouse after decades together. People thought grief was missing the big things. Anniversaries, Christmas morning, the empty side of the bed. Sometimes it was smaller, sitting outside urgent care with nobody asking whether you remembered the doctor's instructions. After Diane died, Tyler began calling more often. At first, I was grateful for it. He needed help with a car repair, then a security deposit, then some furniture, then advice about a job change. None of it seemed unreasonable by itself, and every time I helped, I felt useful. More than that, I felt connected. I did not admit it then, but somewhere along the way I started confusing being needed with being close. The duplex was part of that. Diane and I bought the brick 2-unit property years earlier as retirement income. It was never fancy. 2 modest units, a small patch of lawn, solid bones. The kind of property I understood. After she died, I kept it. Then Tyler got serious about Courtney. About a year before the wedding, I started thinking the duplex might make a good beginning for them. They could live in one unit, rent the other, or use the income however they chose. I never made a final promise. I talked about possibilities. That distinction did not seem important at the time. 6 weeks before the wedding, I decided to finish several repairs before Monday's planned transfer appointment. Tyler offered to help. "I'll be there Saturday morning," he said. 8 sharp. I gave him the spare key on Thursday. "Don't lose that," I told him. He grinned. "You've been telling me that since I was 12. Saturday morning, I got to the duplex before 7:30. I brought coffee for both of us. At 8, Tyler wasn't there. At 8:15, I texted him. At 8:40, he replied. "Wedding stuff came up. Sorry, Dad, I'll make it up to you." I should have packed my tools and gone home. Instead, I looked at the work list. One cabinet needed repositioning before the new flooring could be finished. I had moved heavier things most of my life. My pride made the decision before common sense had a chance. The cabinet shifted. My foot slipped. I caught the weight badly with my right arm. Pain went through the shoulder so sharply that I dropped to one knee. That was the beginning of 6 weeks of doctor visits, physical therapy, careful movement, and people telling me not to do the thing I had spent my whole life doing. Tyler knew. Courtney knew too. She knew because the first time she saw the support brace, she asked whether the duplex would still be ready on time, not whether I was all right. Whether the duplex would be ready. A few days before the wedding, she saw the brace again while we were discussing family photographs. "Do you have to wear that in the pictures?" I thought she was joking. "The therapist says I should." She frowned at the outline beneath my shirt. "It just makes everything look so medical." I remembered that sentence, sitting in my truck outside urgent care. Then something else came back to me. Mark Mills, Courtney's father, had approached me during the reception before the pool incident. Mark was a quiet man, polite but businesslike. We had never spent much time together. He shook my hand and nodded toward Tyler and Courtney across the lawn. "Big week," he said. "Big day." He smiled. "Once Monday comes, we can finally get moving." At the time, I assumed he meant the newlyweds. Maybe their plans, maybe married life. Now, with the canceled transfer appointment and Tyler's frightened phone call still fresh in my mind, those words sounded completely different. Monday. The same Monday my duplex was supposed to change hands. I started the truck. For the first time, I wondered why Courtney's father cared so much about what happened on Monday. By Saturday morning, Mark's comment had stopped sounding casual. I had slept badly. Every time I rolled onto my right side, my shoulder reminded me why. I kept seeing Tyler standing over me at the pool, more worried about the reception than whether I could move my arm. At 9 to 10, someone knocked hard on my front door. Tyler never knocked like that. When I opened it, he was standing on the porch in jeans and yesterday's wedding shoes. Courtney was beside him in oversized sunglasses, her hair pulled back. No makeup, no smile. They were supposed to be driving toward the mountains. Instead, they were on my porch. "We need to talk," Tyler said. I stepped aside. Courtney walked in first, looking around my living room like she expected to find evidence of some crime I had committed overnight. Tyler stayed standing. "So you really canceled it?" I closed the door. "You found out quickly." "That's not an answer." "No," I said. "It isn't." Courtney pulled off her sunglasses. "Bill, this is insane." I looked at her. "What part?" She stared at me for a second, then threw up one hand. "Yesterday. The pool. All of it. It was one stupid joke." My shoulder tightened before I could stop it. "One stupid joke. Yes, I didn't shove you off a roof." Tyler cut in before I answered. Courtney already said she was sorry. She had not, but I let that sit between us. Tyler paced toward the fireplace. "You promised us that duplex. I said I was planning to give it to you. That's the same thing." "No, Tyler. Planning to do something and doing it are not the same thing." His jaw moved. I knew that look. He had worn it at 16 when I told him wanting a car did not mean I owed him one. Now he was 38, married, and talking about a valuable property. Courtney crossed her arms. "We made plans based on what you told us." The sentence caught me. "What plans?" Tyler looked at her. It was quick. Barely a second. But I saw it. Courtney answered before he could. "Our future. Married life. Normal things. Normal things require my deed. Tu le sais. Dad, why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Punishing us." I almost laughed, but nothing about the room felt funny. "You think not giving you my property is punishment? You already gave your word." Then he said the one thing he knew could still get through my defenses. "Mom would never do this." The room changed. Diane's photograph sat on the shelf beside the fireplace. Tyler knew exactly where it was. He looked toward it when he said her name. Your mother isn't here to answer for what she would or wouldn't do. She wanted me taken care of. She wanted you happy. She wanted us to have a start. Courtney nodded as if Diane had personally briefed her. I kept my voice even. Don't use your mother to finish an argument she never got to hear. Tyler looked away. Then I remembered Mark. Your father-in-law said something yesterday. Courtney's shoulders shifted. What? He said, once Monday comes, we can finally get moving. Tyler stopped pacing. I watched his face. What was he talking about? Probably the transfer, Tyler said. Courtney spoke almost on top of him. The honeymoon. They both went quiet. I looked from one to the other. The honeymoon. Courtney pushed her sunglasses onto the top of her head. He was talking generally, about everything starting after the wedding. Tyler rubbed the back of his neck. Dad, Mark gets excited about business stuff. You know how he is. That was the first time anyone had mentioned business. What business stuff? Tyler's eyes came back to mine. Nothing you need to worry about. That answer did more damage than an accusation would have. For 35 years, I had made a living listening for the sentence people used when they hoped you would stop asking questions. Nothing you need to worry about was high on the list. I nodded toward the door. I think we're done for today. Courtney stared at me. So that's it? You're throwing away your relationship with your son because your feelings got hurt? I opened the door. No, I canceled an appointment. Neither of them had an answer for that. Tyler walked past me first. Courtney followed, then turned on the porch. You're going to regret making this bigger than it is. I watched them get into Tyler's SUV. I did not call them back. After they drove away, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. Tyler had mentioned a business once or twice over the past few months. I had assumed it was another idea he and Courtney were exploring. I searched his name, then Courtney's. The company appeared halfway down the page. Oak and Pine Living, LLC. The website looked polished, better than I expected. I clicked. The first photograph on their business page was one I had taken myself. I stared at the photograph long enough to recognize every detail. The duplex stood under a pale spring sky, fresh paint on the trim, new porch lights beside both doors. I had taken that picture 3 weeks earlier after finishing the exterior work. Tyler had asked me to send him a few photos so Courtney could show the family how much progress we had made. I had sent 6. All 6 were on the Oak and Pine website. I scrolled slowly. The page described the duplex as the company's first furnished residential property in Cary. There was no mention that Tyler and Courtney did not own it. No language saying the transfer was still being considered. Nothing suggesting Monday's appointment had even mattered. To anyone reading the page, Oak and Pine already had its first property. My property. I leaned closer to the screen. Under a section called Our Advantage was a photograph of me standing beside an unfinished kitchen cabinet. I remembered that picture. Tyler had taken it months earlier while I was checking measurements. Beneath it were the words, more than 35 years of residential construction knowledge, supporting every Oak and Pine property. They had not used my name on that page. They did not need to. Anyone who knew Tyler knew exactly who the gray-haired contractor in the photograph was. I clicked deeper into the site. Renovation planning, vendor relationships, preventive maintenance, cost control. Those were my words. Not exact sentences, but the language came from conversations I had with Tyler over coffee, from questions he had asked while following me through the duplex, from years of advice I had given because I thought my son was finally interested in how I had made a living. I had mistaken research for respect. A link near the bottom opened a business presentation. The first few slides were ordinary enough. Oak and Pine would purchase or lease small residential properties, furnish them, then rent them to professionals needing medium-term housing. Then I reached a page titled Operating Structure. Tyler Hartley, Operations and Growth. Courtney Hartley, Guest Experience and Marketing. William Hartley, Renovation and Maintenance Advisor. I stopped scrolling. My full name was there. So was an estimate. Approximately 20 hours per week during the first 12 months. I actually read it twice. 20 hours. Every week. I had spent most of my adult life working 50 and 60-hour weeks when jobs demanded it. Retirement had taken me longer to adjust to than I cared to admit, but I had finally learned to enjoy Tuesday mornings without an alarm clock. Coffee on the back porch, a hardware store trip because I wanted one, not because a customer needed something, sometimes lunch with an old friend. Apparently, Tyler and Courtney had already found something else for me to do. I kept reading. My contractor contacts would help Oak and Pine obtain preferred pricing. My experience would reduce renovation risk. My presence would provide hands-on quality assurance. There was even a 2-year growth projection based partly on lower maintenance expenses. I sat back in my chair. The duplex was bad enough, but a house was something I could decide not to give away. This was different. They had taken pieces of my life that did not exist on any deed. My name, my reputation, people I had worked with for decades, my time. None of them had asked me whether I wanted to spend retirement inspecting Tyler's rental properties. Nobody had asked whether my old subcontractors wanted their names attached to Oak and Pine. Nobody had even asked whether my shoulder would let me do the work they had already scheduled. I went back through my email. Searching duplex produced dozens of messages. Searching Tyler's name produced hundreds. Then I found one from 3 months earlier. Tyler had asked whether I still thought the property might become part of his future. I remembered answering late that night. My original message was still there. If everything goes well and you show me you can manage it responsibly, I'd like the duplex to become part of your future. I opened the business presentation again. Near the section describing Oak and Pine's launch property was a quotation attributed simply to family ownership. I'd like the duplex to become part of your future. The first half was gone. If everything goes well, if you show me you can manage it responsibly. Gone. I did not know whether Courtney had cut the sentence or Tyler had. At that moment, it hardly mattered. What mattered was how carefully the meaning had changed. They had not invented a promise. They had taken a possibility and removed every condition attached to it. For 35 years, I had warned customers to read what was actually written before signing anything. Now I was looking at my own words and realizing someone had done the opposite. They had read exactly what I wrote, then kept only the part they could spend. I closed the laptop for a moment. My shoulder ached beneath the support brace, but I barely noticed it now. The strange thing was, I was not thinking about the $340,000. I was thinking about Tuesday morning, about all the Tuesdays Oak and Pine had already decided belonged to them. They hadn't just budgeted my property, they had budgeted my Tuesdays. The sentence about my Tuesdays bothered me more than I expected. I had spent my whole career watching people make expensive mistakes because they trusted what somebody remembered instead of what somebody had written down. Memory softened things. Paper did not. So I went to the hall closet and pulled out the black binder. It was ugly, thick, and older than some of Tyler's friends. The vinyl corners were worn white, and one of the metal rings had to be pressed twice before it closed properly. Diane used to tease me about that binder. "You'd document breakfast if I let you." She was not entirely wrong. Every major project I had ever handled had taught me the same lesson. Save the estimate, save the change order, write down the date, keep the photograph. Never rely on someone saying, "That's not what I meant." The duplex had its own section. I carried the binder to the kitchen table, opened my laptop beside it, and started rebuilding the previous 6 months. At first, nothing looked dramatic. Tyler had asked what one unit could rent for after the improvements. I had answered. He asked what new flooring had cost. I sent him the invoice. He wanted to know which electrician I trusted, which plumber I would call if a water heater failed, and how often I thought an older property needed preventive maintenance. At the time, I had been pleased. My son was finally asking questions about something I understood. Now I looked at the same messages differently. How much would you budget yearly for repairs? Could your flooring guy handle 2 properties at once? Would Ron still give you contractor pricing? Once everything's done, how quickly could somebody move in? One question by itself meant nothing. 6 months of them in order looked like a plan. I printed the messages that mattered and slipped them behind the duplex tab. Then I searched Courtney's name. Her messages had a different tone. Less interest in how things worked. More interest in when they would belong to her. Are we still on schedule? Will everything be ready before the wedding? Is Monday when it becomes official? One text stood out because I had answered it casually. She had written, "So after Monday we're good?" I had replied, "That's the appointment. Nothing more." I had never written, "You can advertise the property." I had never written, "You can rent it." I had never written, "Use my name." The distinction felt obvious to me. Apparently, it had not been convenient for them. Sunday came and went with no call from Tyler. That surprised me. Normally, if he wanted something, he stayed on the problem until I gave him an answer. His silence told me he was waiting for something else. Monday morning, I drove to the office of the real estate attorney who had prepared the transfer documents. I had known Susan Parker professionally for years. She had handled closings on several properties I renovated before retirement. She was direct, careful, and unimpressed by family drama. Exactly what I needed. She brought the file into her conference room. "You canceled Friday," she said. "I did. And you want to make sure nothing moved forward?" "Yes." She opened the folder and turned it toward me. The deed was there, prepared, unsigned, no notarized signature, no delivery, no completed transfer. "The property is still yours, Bill." I knew that, but hearing it from someone who had no emotional connection to Tyler helped. Susan tapped the file. "You had an appointment to execute the gift. You canceled the appointment. That's where things stand. What if somebody has been acting like it already belongs to them?" Her eyes lifted. "Acting how?" I thought about Oak and Pine's website, advertising, planning, using pictures. "Did you authorize any of that?" "No." "Then keep records." That almost made me smile. "I already am." "I figured you were." She did not ask me whether I should forgive my son. She did not tell me blood was thicker than water. She simply confirmed what existed and what did not. By the time I got home, I had another stack for the binder. Property records, the unsigned deed, my original email with the full conditional sentence, screenshots of Oak and Pine's material, Courtney's messages about Monday. I labeled the section with the date. That was another old habit. Dates turned arguments into timeline. Around 3 that afternoon, my phone rang. Mark Mills. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I remembered his comment at the wedding. "Once Monday comes, we can finally get moving." I answered. "Mark." "Bill, do you have a minute?" His voice sounded different from the reception. No easy congratulations. No small talk. "I do. I think you and I need to meet." "What about?" A pause. "Tyler and Courtney." I looked at the black binder on the table. "What about them?" "I'd rather show you in person." Something in his voice made me sit down. "When?" "Today, if you can." I asked whether Courtney knew he was calling. "No." "Tyler?" "No." That answered one question and opened 3 more. Mark exhaled slowly. "Bill, I need to understand what you agreed to before I lose more money." My hand tightened around the phone. "How much money?" Another pause. Then Mark said, "Bill, I loaned them $60,000 because they told me you were already in." Mark chose a quiet diner on the edge of Cary, the kind of place where nobody paid attention to 2 men sitting in a back booth with coffee between them. He was already there when I arrived. A manila folder sat on the table in front of him. For the first few minutes, neither of us touched it. Mark looked older than he had at the wedding. Not physically older, exactly. More like someone had taken the shine off him overnight. "I should have called you months ago," he said. "That makes 2 of us." He nodded once. Then he opened the folder. The first document was a loan agreement. $60,000. Oak and Pine Living LLC was listed as the borrower. Tyler and Courtney had both signed personal guarantees beneath it. Mark's name was underneath as the lender. "This wasn't a wedding gift," he said. "They're supposed to pay it back." I read the first page, then the second. The agreement itself looked straightforward enough. What did they tell you the money was for? Startup costs, furnishings, deposits, marketing, working capital, and the duplex? Mark rubbed his thumb along the rim of his coffee cup. "They said it was the first property." My stomach tightened. "They told you they owned it?" "Not exactly." That answer made me look up. Mark sighed. "They told me you had committed it to the company. Tyler said the transfer was already settled between the 2 of you and Monday was just the final paperwork." He sought back. "He told you that?" "More than once." Mark reached into the folder and removed a printed presentation. I recognized the Oak and Pine logo immediately. This version was longer than the one I had found online. There were pages on projected income, occupancy rates, renovation costs, and expansion plans. Then I saw my name, William Hartley, not just in a photograph this time, in writing, founding renovation advisor. Below that was a short paragraph describing more than 35 years of residential construction experience. My experience? It said Oak and Pine would benefit from established contractor relationships, hands-on property oversight, and reduced maintenance expenses. Mark watched my face. "You didn't agree to that?" "No." I started wondering about that Friday night. I closed the presentation. "How?" Tyler called me from the reception. That caught me off guard. "What did he say?" "That there was a family misunderstanding, that you had gotten upset and canceled Monday." Mark gave a humorless little laugh. He sounded like a man whose engine had fallen out of his car. That explained Tyler's call to me. Not everything, but more than I had known. Mark pushed another sheet across the table. I asked him if the property was still coming into Oak and Pine. What did he say? He said you'd calm down. I looked at him. Those exact words. Pretty much. Mark folded his hands. Bill, I'm not trying to make myself look innocent here. I should have spoken to you directly before I handed them a dime. Why didn't you? He took his time answering. Because Courtney is numbers. Courtney is my daughter, and Tyler was about to become my son-in-law when I made the loan. They showed me plans, numbers, photos. They knew enough about the property to make it sound real. He glanced down, and your name was all over it. That hurt in a different way. Not because Mark believed them, because I understood why he had. They had used my reputation as collateral without ever asking permission. You never called me because you thought there was nothing left to confirm. Exactly. I looked through the presentation again. Some of the projected renovation savings were tied to contractor pricing. Several people listed as possible vendors were men I had worked with for years. Ron Bell, Danny Foster, Mike Harris, people who would have returned my call because of my name. Not Tyler's, Mark said quietly. I thought you were helping your son start a business. I thought I was helping him get married. Neither of us spoke for a while. I had walked into the diner expecting Mark to be the man behind the curtain, the wealthy father-in-law, the one pushing Tyler and Courtney toward my property. Instead, he had been standing on the other side of the same lie, not blameless, but fooled. That changed the shape of things. Where did the $60,000 go? Some of it's still in the business account. Not enough. They bought furniture, paid for branding, put deposits down on services. Courtney spent money preparing the first unit for launch. The first unit they didn't own. Mark nodded. That's why I called. He gathered several pages, then stopped. There's something else. Of course there was. He pulled a printed calendar from the back of the folder. Oak and Pine promotional schedule. The dates ran 6 weeks back. Photographs. Investor meeting. Website content. Vendor planning. I scanned down the page. Then my finger stopped. Saturday, 8 in the morning. I knew the date before I read the details. Oak and Pine promotional photography and lender meeting. Tyler and Courtney. 9 o'clock through noon. I stared at the date. That was the morning Tyler had promised to meet me at the duplex. The morning I had stood there with 2 cups of coffee waiting for my son. The morning he texted that wedding stuff had come up. Mark saw my expression. What? I kept looking at the schedule. That morning. What about it? My right shoulder started aching, as if my body had remembered before I finished the thought. I looked at Mark. That was the same morning my shoulder gave out. The date on Mark's schedule stayed in front of me even after I looked away. 6 weeks earlier, Tyler had told me wedding preparations had pulled him away from the duplex. Now I was looking at proof that he had spent that same morning posing for Oak and Pine photographs and meeting with Mark about a business built around property I still owned. I asked Mark if he had any of the pictures. He nodded and slid his phone across the table. There was Tyler standing in front of a staged living room display with Courtney beside him, both of them smiling at the camera. Another photograph showed Tyler leaning over a table covered with floor plans and rental projections. The timestamp was 9:18 that morning. At 9:18, I had still been waiting for him at the duplex. By 10, I had accepted that he was not coming. I already knew what happened next. I tried to move the cabinet alone, lost my footing, and damaged my shoulder catching its weight. I did not need to relive the fall. What mattered now was where my son had been while I was doing the work he had promised to help me with. Eventually, I got myself home. Tyler called that evening. I remembered being surprised. Dad, you okay? I hurt my shoulder. How bad? Doctor thinks it's the rotator cuff. There had been a pause. Then Tyler asked something I had forgotten until that moment. How long are you going to be limited? I looked across the diner table at Mark. The memory came back word for word. 4 weeks? 6? At the time, I thought he was worried. I had actually felt grateful. My son was asking about my recovery. Now I wondered whether he had been asking about something else. Mark turned the promotional schedule toward me again. The weeks after my injury were divided into phases. Initial setup, unit preparation, maintenance launch, vendor coordination. Next to one section was a note. Renovation support begins after mid-May. I counted backward. Mid-May was almost exactly 6 weeks after I got hurt. My mouth went dry. They built the schedule after my injury? Mark frowned. I believe so. Do you know when? He searched through the papers. There was an updated version sent the Monday after I injured myself. Tyler had called me Saturday night asking how long I would be limited. 2 days later, Oak and Pine had updated its renovation timetable. I did not need anybody to explain what that looked like. My recovery had become a scheduling problem. The worst part was how ordinary everything must have seemed to Tyler. Dad gets hurt. Ask when Dad can work again. Adjust the calendar. I thought about Courtney looking at my brace before the wedding and complaining that it made the photographs look too medical. Then I thought about the pool. My shoulder had not been an unknown weakness to them. It had been information. I drove home after meeting Mark with copies of the schedule in the passenger seat. Later that afternoon, my cousin Ellen called. We usually spoke every few weeks, mostly birthdays and family news. This time, she sounded uncomfortable. "Bill, I don't want to get in the middle." That usually meant somebody was already in the middle. "Then don't," she sighed. "I just think maybe everybody should cool down." "About what?" "The wedding. The property. All of it." I waited. Then she said, "Courtney says they've got people depending on them now." "What people?" "I don't know. Business people, I guess." She hesitated. "And somebody is already waiting to move into the duplex." I sat straighter. "Move into it?" "That's what she said." "When?" "I don't know, Bill. I shouldn't have mentioned it, but she already had." After we hung up, I opened the binder and wrote one sentence on a clean sheet of paper. "Someone is waiting to move in." I underlined it twice. Tyler had never told me anyone was moving into my property. Courtney had never asked. Nobody had sent me a name, a date, or a lease. I was still staring at that sentence when my phone buzzed. Mark had sent a message. "I found one more thing you need to see." A minute later, an email arrived. I opened it. Then Mark showed me an email that changed the way I saw my son. The email was from Tyler to Mark. I read it once. Then I read it again, slower. Mark had asked a simple question 2 weeks before the wedding. "Has Bill actually transferred the duplex yet, or are we still waiting on paperwork?" Tyler's answer was short. "Not transferred yet. Monday after the wedding is when we finish it. Dad won't back out. He hates conflict, and he's not going to risk losing his only son over one property." I sat at my kitchen table with the laptop open and felt something colder than anger move through me. For days, I had been trying to understand whether Tyler had simply followed Courtney's lead. That explanation had been easy to believe. Courtney was louder, more demanding, more comfortable talking about my property as if it already belonged to her. Tyler usually played the quieter role. He sighed. He asked me to keep the peace. He told me not to make things difficult. I had mistaken quieter for weaker. The email told me otherwise. Tyler had not been dragged into somebody else's plan. He understood exactly what he was doing. Worse, he understood me. He knew what happened after Diane died. He knew how empty the house felt. He knew there were nights I answered his calls too quickly because hearing my son's voice made the silence easier. He knew I had let arguments go because I was afraid distance might become permanent. And somewhere along the way, my son had stopped seeing those things as vulnerabilities a decent person protected. He had started treating them as guarantees. Dad hates conflict. Dad won't risk losing me. Dad will give in. I printed the email. The printer hummed while I stood beside it, watching the page slide out. When it finished, I placed it in the black binder, not because I intended to attack Tyler with it, because I needed to stop talking myself out of what I could see. For years, whenever Tyler disappointed me, I had found another explanation for him. He was stressed. He was young. He had bills. Marriage was complicated. Courtney pushed too hard. This time, I had his own words. There was nobody else to blame for them. I spent the next hour going through everything Oak and Pine had published. Then I wrote one message. I kept it simple. I stated that I had not authorized Oak and Pine Living LLC to use the duplex as company property, advertise it as available, use my renovation photographs, present my professional history as part of its business, promise my contractor relationships, or represent me as a renovation or maintenance advisor. I also made one thing clear. I would not provide labor or services to Oak and Pine. I sent the message to both Tyler and Courtney. Then I copied Mark. No accusation, no speech about the wedding, no mention of the pool, just facts. Tyler called less than 5 minutes later. He let it ring. Courtney called after him. I let that ring too. A text appeared from Tyler. "Dad, call me. You're making this worse." I looked at the words for several seconds. Making this worse. Not discovering it. Not stopping it. Making it worse. That distinction told me a lot. I put the phone face down. For the first time in years, I did not feel responsible for calming my son down. Before dinner, I was putting the binder back together when an image from the wedding came back to me. Not the shove, something before it. A young woman in a pale bridesmaid dress had been standing near Courtney by the pool. I could not remember her name. I did remember the way she looked at me, not at my face, at my shoulder. I had shifted my arm because it was aching under the jacket. The bridesmaid glanced at the support brace, showing slightly near my collar, leaned toward Courtney, and whispered something. Courtney turned her head toward me. Then she smiled. At the time, it had meant nothing. Weddings were full of whispers. People talked about photographs, flowers, speeches, dresses. But now I sat there wondering what that woman had said. Courtney already knew I was injured. That much was certain. Still, something about the moment bothered me. It felt too close to what happened afterward. I opened the binder again and wrote a note beneath Tyler's email. Bridesmaid near pool. Looked at shoulder. Spoke to Courtney before shove. I almost laughed at myself. 35 years of contracting had turned me into a man who documented his own family. But documentation had never created the truth. It only stopped people from changing it later. My phone rang again around 7. This time, the name on the screen surprised me. My sister, Linda, I answered. She did not ask how my shoulder was. She did not ask why Tyler had used my name in a business without permission. Instead, she sounded tired before I said hello. Bill, what is going on with you? I leaned back in my chair. What did Tyler tell you? It's not just Tyler. Courtney's upset. Everybody's upset. About what? There was a pause. Then my sister asked why I was destroying Tyler's marriage over one harmless joke. Linda's question told me exactly what Tyler and Courtney had been doing while I was sitting at my kitchen table trying to understand the truth. They were getting ahead of it. What harmless joke? I asked. The pool. I looked down at my shoulder. That's what Courtney called it? She said she splashed you. You got embarrassed, and then you canceled a $300,000 wedding gift. $340,000. Linda went quiet. That isn't helping, Bill. I'm not trying to help their version. She sighed. Then, she sent me the video Courtney had been sharing. It lasted 14 seconds. The first frame showed me already standing on the pool steps, soaked from head to toe. A man beside me was holding my elbow. Courtney could be heard laughing somewhere off camera. It was just a joke. Then Tyler entered the frame. Dad, don't ruin our wedding. The video ended. No shove. No fall. No moment where I struggled to reach the steps. Just an old man dripping water onto a patio while the bride tried to laugh things off. I understood immediately why relatives were calling me unreasonable. Courtney had not invented what happened. She had simply decided where the story began. Linda said, "You can see why people think you overreacted. Can you?" What am I supposed to think? That maybe 14 seconds isn't the whole afternoon. She was quiet again. Then she said something that hurt more than I expected. Tyler says you haven't been yourself since Diane died. There it was. My grief had become evidence against me. What does that mean? He says you've gotten more sensitive, more emotional about family things. I almost asked her which family things. My property? My labor? Being pushed into a swimming pool with an injured shoulder? Instead, I said, did Tyler mention Oak and Pine? No. Did he mention using my duplex as their business property before they owned it? Another pause. No. Did he mention putting my name and work history into their plans? No. Then maybe you don't have the whole story. Linda's voice softened. I just don't want you losing your son over this. That sentence would have controlled me a week earlier. Tyler had counted on it. Now I heard it differently. I'm not the one who decided our relationship depended on a piece of property. After we hung up, 2 more messages came in. One from an aunt, one from a former neighbor who had known Tyler since grade school. Both said some version of the same thing. Was the duplex really worth tearing the family apart? By Tuesday afternoon, Courtney's version had traveled farther than mine ever would have. I considered writing a long response. I opened social media, typed 3 paragraphs, deleted them, typed again, deleted that too. I could have explained the shoulder, the business, the canceled transfer, Tyler's email, but I could already hear how it would sound. A father building a case against his own son in public. So I closed the page. Around 5 that afternoon, my cousin Ellen called again. Her voice was sharper this time. Bill, I know you're upset, but they have people depending on them. I remembered the sentence she had used before. Who? Courtney said they've already got someone moving into the duplex. This time I did not let it pass. Who is moving in? I don't know. When? She didn't say. Did Courtney tell you they had permission to rent it? Ellen hesitated. She said everything was basically done until you pulled out. Basically done. Another phrase that meant whatever people needed it to mean. I wrote it in the binder. Someone moving into duplex. Second mention. What are they supposed to tell that person now? Ellen asked. That the people who promised them my property didn't own it. You make it sound so cold. No. I'm making it sound accurate. She ended the call soon after that. I sat alone for a while. What bothered me was not that Courtney had convinced relatives I was cruel. Families had been choosing easier stories for generations. What bothered me was that I still did not know how many people Tyler and Courtney had made promises to. Mark had put in $60,000. Now somebody apparently expected to move into my duplex. And the wedding video being passed around had turned me into the villain before I could even understand the full problem. Just after 7, my phone rang. The name on the screen was Carol Hayes. I had known Carol and her husband for more than 20 years. She and Diane had served on the same church committee, and Carol had been sitting near the pool at the reception. I hope I'm not bothering you, she said. You're not. I saw what Courtney posted. My grip tightened around the phone. I figured, that isn't the video I remember. I sat straighter. What do you mean? My granddaughter recorded most of that part of the reception on my phone. She was trying to get Tyler and Courtney by the pool. I said nothing. I checked it tonight, Carol continued. It starts earlier. How much earlier? About a minute. My eyes went to the note in the binder about the bridesmaid. Can you send it to me? I already did. My phone buzzed. A video file appeared in our messages. My thumb moved toward it. Then Carol said, Bill, don't watch the shove first. Watch the 30 seconds before it. I opened Carol's video at my kitchen table. For the first few seconds, nothing looked important. Music played in the background. Guests moved around the patio. Someone laughed near the bar. Then I saw myself standing beside the pool. My right arm was held close to my body. A bridesmaid stepped toward Courtney. Carol's phone had picked up more sound than I expected. The young woman glanced directly at my shoulder and said, Careful with Bill. That's the shoulder he hurt working on your place. Courtney did not look surprised. She did not ask what the bridesmaid meant. She did not say she had forgotten. She simply answered, I know. 2 words. That was all. I paused the video. Then I backed it up and listened again. I know. Tyler was standing only a few feet away. He was looking toward Courtney when the warning was given. There was no reasonable way to pretend he had been somewhere else. I let the video continue. The bridesmaid moved away. Courtney watched me for several seconds. Then she walked toward me. I already knew what came next, but seeing it from the outside felt different. Her hands went forward. My body disappeared over the edge. People shouted. Tyler turned immediately. The recording caught me struggling toward the steps while 2 guests reached down to help. Then came Courtney's laugh. It was just a joke. And Tyler's voice, Dad, don't ruin our wedding. I closed the video before it ended. For several minutes, I did nothing. I had wanted proof that Courtney knew. Now I had it. But the part I had not expected was Tyler. He had heard the warning too. He had watched his wife shove me anyway. And afterward, he had chosen to protect the mood of his wedding instead of his father. My first instinct was to send the video to everyone who had called me unreasonable. Linda, Ellen, every relative who had received Courtney's edited 14 seconds. I even opened a group message. Then I stopped. I had spent 35 years learning that evidence was most useful before people knew exactly what you had. Once you threw everything onto the table, you could not take it back. So I saved the original file to my computer. Then I made a second copy on a flash drive and put it inside the black binder. I did not post a word. The next afternoon, Tyler finally came to my house. Courtney was with him. Neither looked like newlyweds. Tyler held a printed copy of the notice I had sent about oak and pine. He dropped it onto my kitchen table. What exactly are you trying to do? I'm telling your company what it doesn't have permission to use. Courtney stared at me. You can't just pull yourself out now. I was never in. Yes, you were. No, you put me in. Tyler leaned forward. Dad, we built plans around what you told us. You built plans around what you wanted me to mean. Courtney shook her head sharply. That is not fair. I looked at her. Did I agree to work 20 hours a week for oak and pine? She said nothing. Did I agree to let you use my contractor relationships? Still nothing. Did I authorize you to present my duplex as your first property? Tyler stepped in. You said it was going to be ours. Going to be is not the same as is. Courtney looked at him, then back at me. But you already signed off. The room went quiet. Tyler's head turned toward her. What? She frowned. You told me Bill had signed off. Tyler answered too quickly. No, I said Dad agreed in principle. Courtney stared at him. I watched the space between them change. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Up to that moment, They had entered my house as a team. Now Courtney looked confused. Not guilty, not innocent. Confused. She turned back to me. Tyler said everything was already settled. I never said that, Tyler replied. Yes, you did. I said Monday was paperwork. That's not the same thing? Tyler rubbed both hands over his face. Courtney, not now. That made me pay closer attention. I had already seen Tyler tell Mark that I would never back out. I had seen him present my property and experience as settled parts of their company. But this was different. Courtney was not arguing about what I had told her. She was arguing about what Tyler had told her I had said. I did not interrupt. For once, I let the silence work. Courtney looked at her husband. That's not what you told me. The look Courtney gave, Tyler stayed with me after they left. Not because it made her innocent. It didn't. She had still used my property, my name, and my injury as if my consent were optional. But for the first time, I understood that Tyler might have been telling different people different versions of the same story. The next morning, I drove to the duplex. I told myself I was going there to check the lock. That was only partly true. Twice now, relatives had mentioned someone moving in. I wanted to know whether that was another exaggeration or something real. I knew the answer before I even parked. A Silver sat in the driveway. The front door of the left unit was open. Through the window, I could see two women inside. One looked to be in her late 50s, holding a tape measure. The other looked to be in her 30s and was writing numbers on a notepad. I walked in. Excuse me. Both women turned. The older woman smiled. Oh, good. You must be Tyler's maintenance man. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood her. His what? Maintenance man. She held out her hand. I'm Nancy Foster. This is my daughter, Kelly. I shook her hand automatically. My name is Bill Hartley. Her smile faded slightly. I know, your number is on the paperwork. What paperwork? Nancy looked at her daughter, then back at me. The lease. The word landed harder than I expected. You signed a lease for this unit? Yes. With who? Oak and Pine Living. She reached into a tote bag on the kitchen counter and pulled out a folder. I dealt mostly with Tyler. I took the papers. There it was. The duplex address. Move-in date. Rental amount. Oak and Pine Living LLC. Tyler's signature at the bottom. Mine was nowhere on it. Nancy pointed toward a line near the second page. That's your number, right? Under emergency maintenance contact was my name and cell phone number. William Hartley. No title. No permission. Just an assumption that if something broke, I would show up. How much have you paid them? Nancy's face changed. Why? Because I own this property. The room went silent. Her daughter lowered the notepad. Nancy gave a short, nervous laugh. I'm sorry? I own the duplex. Tyler does not. She stared at me, but he showed it to us. When? 2 weeks ago. He had a key? Yes. Of course he did. The spare key I had handed him 6 weeks earlier. The one I told him not to lose. I felt foolish standing there. Not because Tyler had forged anything. He had not needed to. I had given him access because I trusted my son. Nancy opened the folder again. I paid a deposit in the first month's rent. How much altogether? $4,200. Kelly stepped closer to her mother. Mom, don't pay anything else. I wasn't planning to. Nancy looked at me. Are you saying this lease isn't valid? I'm saying I never authorized Tyler or Oak and Pine to lease this unit. Her face lost color. She sat down on the edge of the kitchen counter. For the first time since the wedding, my anger moved away from what Tyler had done to me. Nancy had nothing to do with our family. She had simply believed a man who had a key, paperwork, and enough details to look legitimate. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I should have checked. I looked around the room. So should I. She frowned. Checked what? Not the deed. I folded the lease. My son. I told Nancy not to send another dollar to anyone until the situation was straightened out. I took photographs of the paperwork with her permission and promised I would contact her after I spoke with Tyler. Before I left the duplex, I called a locksmith and arranged to have both units rekeyed that afternoon. Tyler had been given that spare key to help me with repairs, not to show my property to tenants. I wasn't making that mistake twice. Then I drove home and called him. He answered on the fourth ring. What now? There's a woman named Nancy Foster standing inside my duplex with a lease you signed. Silence. Tyler? I can explain. Did she pay you $4,200? Another pause. Yes. Give it back. It isn't that simple. It is exactly that simple. We use some of it. For what? Business expenses. I closed my eyes. How much is left? I don't know. That means none. Dad, we thought the transfer was happening. There it was again. We thought, as if believing something strongly enough gave him permission to spend someone else's money. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with the black binder open. Mark was out $60,000. Nancy was out $4,200. Tyler and Courtney had created the mess. But I had enough savings to make both people whole immediately. I could fix it. That was the dangerous part. I had always been good at fixing things. That night, I wrote 2 checks totaling $64,200. I left both checks on the kitchen table overnight. One was for $60,000 to Mark. The other was for $4,200 to Nancy. $64,200. $60,000 for Mark. $4,200 for Nancy. I had written both amounts down before I wrote the checks, almost like I was pricing a repair job. Add the damaged pieces, figure out what it costs to make everything whole, pay the bill, move on. By morning, the idea had started to feel reasonable. That was what frightened me. I could afford it. It would hurt, but it would not ruin me. Diane and I had saved carefully for retirement. We had never lived extravagantly, and the duplex still produced income. If I paid Mark and Nancy myself, nobody innocent would lose money. The family phone calls would probably stop. Tyler and Courtney could start their marriage without more than $64,000 hanging over their heads, and I would not have to watch my son struggle. That last part was the truth I did not want to admit. I had spent years telling myself I helped Tyler because that was what fathers did, but sometimes I helped him because I could not stand watching consequences reach him. Around 10 that morning, Tyler called. "Can Courtney and I come over?" "What for?" "We have a way to fix this." I almost smiled at the word fix. "Come by." They arrived 20 minutes later with a folder. Courtney sat across from me while Tyler remained standing. He opened the folder and placed 2 documents on the table. The first was related to the duplex transfer. The second was a statement. I read the first paragraph twice. It said I had previously authorized Oak and Pine to market the duplex, prepare it for rental, and make preliminary leasing arrangements. I looked up. "I never authorized this." Tyler pulled out a chair. "Dad, it just explains what everybody understood. Everybody except me." Courtney leaned forward. "This would solve Nancy's problem." "No. Giving Nancy her money back solves Nancy's problem. It would make the lease legitimate. It would make your actions look authorized after the fact." Tyler's mouth tightened. "We're trying to keep this from becoming a legal mess." "Then don't ask me to sign something that isn't true." Courtney pushed the transfer document toward me. "If you complete the deed like you were supposed to, none of this matters." Like I was supposed to. I looked at Tyler. "You still think my property belongs to you because I considered giving it to you. You promised. I intended to give it to you. Same thing." "No." Courtney glanced at Tyler. "You told me Monday was only paperwork." Tyler's face tightened. "We've been over this." She started to answer, but he cut her off. "Not now." I did not push either of them. I simply noticed the same thing I had noticed before. Courtney's certainty had come from somewhere, and it had not come from me. Courtney believed Tyler had told her something much stronger than a plan or an intention. I wanted to ask exactly what he had said, but Tyler was already gathering the papers. "Dad, think about it. We can still fix this." After they left, I stared at the unsigned statement. Then at the 2 checks. 2 different ways to rescue Tyler. One would cost me money. The other would cost me the truth. For an hour, I convinced myself the money was the better choice. I would pay Mark. I would reimburse Nancy. I would refuse the false statement but remove the immediate damage. Everyone could calm down. Maybe Tyler would learn something from the scare. I had told myself that before. I opened the black binder and started looking for the retirement section. Diane and I had kept yearly summaries of savings, property income, insurance, and major plans. I wanted to see exactly how much $64,200 would change my retirement. Behind an old bank statement, I found several pages in Diane's handwriting. I stopped. Her handwriting had always leaned slightly to the right. Small, neat letters. She made lists for everything: roof replacement, travel, medical reserve, duplex. Seeing her writing after 4 years hit me harder than I expected. I ran my thumb along the edge of the page. It was not a letter to me, not some message she had hidden for the future. It was simply one of our old retirement planning sheets. That made it feel more real. Besides several expenses, Diane had written short reminders: protect emergency fund, no loans against house, travel while we're healthy. Then I found the word duplex. There was a note beside it. I read it once, then again. Both checks were still sitting 3 feet away from me. Beside the word duplex, Diane had written, ours first, Tyler later, if he learns to carry his own weight. I read Diane's note until the words stopped looking like handwriting and started sounding like her voice. Ours first, Tyler later, if he learns to carry his own weight. That was Diane. Not cruel, not cold, just clear. She had spent years trying to teach me the difference between helping our son and carrying him. Whenever Tyler got himself into trouble as a teenager, I was usually the first one reaching for my wallet, my truck keys, or my toolbox. Diane would stop me. Give him a hand, Bill. Don't become his legs. I used to laugh at that. After she died, I stopped listening. Somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that generosity was how I kept Tyler close. The checks on the table proved how far that had gone. I picked up both checks. Together, they came to $64,200. Enough to erase Nancy's loss. Enough to protect Mark from his bad decision. Enough to make Tyler and Courtney's mistake easier to survive. And enough to teach my son the same lesson I had taught him for years. If you create a big enough problem, Dad will eventually pay for it. I tore the first check in half, then the second. I tore both again and dropped the pieces into the trash. My hands shook afterward, not because I regretted it, because I knew something had changed. I called Tyler first. He answered immediately. Dad, I'm not signing your statement. Silence. I'm not completing the deed either. Can we talk about this? We've talked. You don't understand what this is going to do to us. I looked at Diane's note. For once, I think I do. He started to say something else. I ended the call. Then I called the property manager a friend had recommended. Her name was Melissa Grant. She had managed small residential properties around Cary for nearly 15 years. I told her I owned a duplex, that I wanted professional management, and that I no longer intended to handle every repair myself. She asked when I wanted her to start. As soon as possible. That sentence felt strange coming out of my mouth. For decades, if something broke, I fixed it. If paint peeled, I scraped it. If a door zagged, I re-hung it. Hiring someone else had always felt like wasting money. Now it felt like protecting what was left of me. Melissa walked the property with me the next day. She made a list. Loose exterior trim, a sticking bathroom door, one cabinet that still needed proper adjustment. My eyes stopped on that cabinet longer than they should have. You want your contractor to handle this? She asked. I don't have one yet. I can give you 3 names. Normally, I would have said I could do it myself. Instead, I said, give me the names. I called one of them that afternoon and hired him to finish the work I had no business doing with a damaged shoulder. Later that day, I called Nancy. I told her exactly where things stood. The duplex was mine. Tyler had never received ownership. Oak and Pine had never been authorized to lease the unit. She should not send them another dollar. I understand, she said quietly. I also want you to know something else. If you still want the place after this is settled, you'll get the first chance to sign a proper lease through the property manager. There was a pause. You'd still rent it to me. You didn't create this mess. Her voice softened. Thank you. I can't promise when your money comes back. I know, but Tyler and Courtney are responsible for returning it. I heard myself say the words, responsible for returning it, not me. Them. After the call, I opened the black binder one more time. It had grown thick over the past few days. Emails, screenshots, schedules, the unauthorized lease, the wedding video. Too much information could become its own kind of weakness. If I walked into a room with 50 pages, Tyler could argue about page 37 until everyone forgot what page 1 said, so I reduced everything to 4 things. First, my full email showing the duplex was conditional, not guaranteed. Second, Oak and Pine's materials using my property, experience, photographs, and future labor. Third, Nancy's lease signed without my permission. Fourth, the original wedding recording. That was enough. Then I wrote one question on a blank sheet. Why does Courtney think I already signed? I underlined it twice. That question mattered because Courtney had said it more than once. Not that I intended to sign. Not that Tyler expected me to. That I already had. Somebody had given her that certainty. I closed the binder. A few minutes later, my phone rang. Tyler. His voice was quieter than usual. Dad, we need one final meeting. I looked at Diane's note beside the brass key. All right. Your house? No. Then where? I already knew. Tyler wanted one final meeting. I told him we would have it at the duplex. Tyler arrived first. He parked beside the duplex and stayed in his SUV for nearly a minute before getting out. Courtney came in a separate car with Mark behind her. I had already unlocked the front unit. The place smelled faintly of new paint and sawdust. Afternoon light came through the front windows and fell across the kitchen where I had spent so many hours trying to make everything right before the wedding. The cabinet that injured my shoulder was still there, only now someone else had adjusted it properly. I stood beside the kitchen counter with the black binder in front of me. Tyler looked around. "This is dramatic." "No," I said. "It's accurate." Courtney crossed her arms. Mark said nothing. I had chosen the duplex because every argument we were having led back to that building. My property, their business, Nancy's lease, my injury. There would be no pretending we were discussing some vague family misunderstanding. Tyler pulled out a chair. "Can we just get this over with?" "That depends on what you mean by over." He rubbed his jaw. "Dad, everybody believed this place was ours." I looked at him. "Everybody?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because you promised it. I considered giving it to you. You scheduled the transfer." "I did. You told us it would be part of our future." "I did." He leaned forward like he had finally cornered me. "So what were we supposed to think? That until I gave it to you, it was still mine?" Courtney shook her head. "That is such a technicality." "No, ownership is not a technicality." Tyler let out a frustrated breath. "You knew we were making plans. I knew you were getting married. You knew about Oak and Pine. Not until after the wedding." That stopped him. Courtney looked toward Tyler. He looked away. I opened the binder. "I'm not going to argue about memories. I brought 4 things." Tyler stared at the binder like it had personally offended him. I took out the first page. "My email." I read the full sentence aloud. "If everything goes well and you show me you can manage it responsibly, I'd like the duplex to become part of your future." Then I placed the Oak and Pine version beside it. "I'd like the duplex to become part of your future." Courtney looked down. The conditions disappeared. Tyler said, "That doesn't change what you meant." "It changes exactly what I meant." I pulled out the second item. Oak and Pine's business material. The duplex photographs, my work history, the list of contractor relationships, my name beside 20 hours of weekly renovation and maintenance work. I slid the pages toward Tyler. "Show me where I agreed to any of this." He did not touch them. Courtney said, "We assumed you'd want to help. 20 hours every week?" "It was an estimate." "Based on whose time?" She looked away. I pulled out Nancy's lease. Mark's expression hardened before Tyler even saw it. "This woman paid you $4,200 to move into property you didn't own." Tyler shifted in his chair. "We expected the deed to transfer." "That isn't what I asked. We were trying to get ahead. You got ahead of ownership." Mark finally spoke. "Did you accept rent before Bill transferred the duplex?" Tyler looked at him. "It was a deposit. Did you accept money?" "Yes." "Knowing the property was still Bill's?" Tyler's face tightened. "We knew the transfer was scheduled." Mark leaned back. "That's not the question." For once, Tyler had nothing quick to say. I reached for the 4th item. My laptop. I played the full wedding recording. Nobody spoke while it ran. The bridesmaid's warning came clearly. "That's the shoulder he hurt working on your place." Courtney's voice followed. "I know." Tyler stood beside her in the frame. Then came the shove. The splash. My struggle at the steps. Courtney's laugh. Tyler telling me not to ruin the wedding. When the video ended, I closed the laptop. Courtney's face had gone pale. Tyler stared at the floor. I said, "That is what happened before your 14-second version started." Courtney swallowed. "I shouldn't have pushed you." It was the first time she had said it without adding the word joke. Tyler looked at me. "So this is really about the pool?" "No." He frowned. "The pool is where I finally stopped making excuses for everything else." Silence filled the kitchen. Then Tyler pushed back from the table. "Everybody thought the duplex was ours." I looked at him. "Who is everybody?" "Courtney. Mark. Nancy." I waited. "Anyone else?" He did not answer. I tapped the deed information inside the binder. "Interesting." "What?" "I'm the only person who owned it." I looked directly at my son, and somehow I was the only one you never asked. Mark turned toward Tyler. "Did you tell Nancy you had authority to lease this place?" Tyler opened his mouth. Before he answered, Courtney reached for her purse. Her movements were quick now, nervous. She pulled out her phone and unlocked it. "Wait." Tyler looked at her. "Courtney." She ignored him. Her thumb moved across the screen. Then she looked at me. Then at Mark. "There's something Tyler told me none of you have seen." Courtney held the phone between us, but she looked only at Tyler. "I saved the messages," she said. Tyler's face changed. "Not much. Just enough." "Courtney, this isn't helping." "That depends on who you're trying to help." She tapped the screen and turned it toward me. The message was dated 9 days before the wedding. Tyler had written, "Dad signed off. Monday is just the formality. I read it once, then I looked at him. You told her I signed off? Tyler stood too quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. That's not what I meant. Courtney gave a short laugh with no humor in it. You told me exactly what you meant. I meant Dad had agreed. No, you said he signed off. Mark held out his hand. Let me see. Courtney passed him the phone. Mark read the message, then looked at Tyler with a kind of disappointment I recognized. It was the look a man gives a wall after realizing the crack is not in the paint, it is in the foundation. I opened the binder and placed Tyler's email to Mark beside Courtney's phone. To Mark, Tyler had admitted the transfer was not complete. He had simply promised I would never back out. To Courtney, he had gone further. Dad signed off. To me, he had said almost nothing at all. 3 people, 3 versions, all designed to get Tyler what he wanted. Courtney stared at her husband. You knew? Knew what? That Bill hadn't approved the company the way you said. He was giving us the duplex. That isn't what I asked. Tyler pointed at me. He was going to give it to us. Everybody understood that. There was that word again. Everybody. I closed the binder. No, Tyler. Everybody understood whatever version you gave them. He looked at me. You're acting like I forged your signature. I didn't say you did. Then stop making me sound like a criminal. I'm making you sound like a man who told different stories because the truth wasn't useful enough. Courtney lowered herself into a chair. For the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely shaken. I thought Monday was paperwork, she said. I believed that she believed it. But that did not erase anything. I turned toward her. Tyler lied to you. Her eyes lifted. Yes, you lied about me. She went still. The edited wedding video. She looked away. You told people you barely splashed me. You knew about my shoulder. You used my photographs. You let your company use my work history. You planned my time without asking me. Her face tightened. I thought the property was ours. That explains what you believed. I paused. It does not excuse what you chose. She did not answer. Then I looked at Tyler. And you don't get to hide behind your wife anymore. His head came up. I'm not. You have been. That's not fair. You signed Nancy's lease. Silence. You took her money. His jaw tightened. You told Mark I wouldn't back out because I was afraid of losing my only son. He looked at the floor. That was business language. No, that was my life. The room went quiet. For years I had wondered whether Tyler understood how much leverage he had over me after Diane died. Now I knew. He had understood it well enough to put it in an email. I slid the brass key from my pocket and set it on the table. Tyler's eyes followed it. The duplex is not being transferred. His face hardened. Dad, I'm not finished. I kept my voice calm. I will not be part of Oak and Pine. My name, photographs, contacts, experience, and labor are not available to the company. Courtney started to speak. I held up one hand. I will not pay Nancy's $4,200 for you. Tyler stared at me. She needs that money. Yes. So you're just going to let her lose it? No. You are going to return it. He shook his head. We don't have it right now. Then you figure out how to earn it. I turned toward Mark. And your $60,000 is between you and them. Mark nodded slowly. It is now. He looked at Tyler and Courtney. The loan agreement still stands. I expect repayment according to its terms. If you need to sell what you bought for the company, sell it. If you need to change the schedule, we can discuss that. But I'm not putting in another dollar. Courtney looked stunned. Dad. No. Mark's answer was quiet. That made it stronger. Tyler looked from Mark to me. For years, whenever something collapsed around him, someone stepped forward. Usually me. This time nobody moved. No new loan. No deed. No free labor. No father writing a check after midnight to make the consequences disappear. Tyler finally sat down. What am I supposed to do? I looked at my son. The question would once have broken me. Instead, I answered the only way I could. You're 38 years old, Tyler. His eyes stayed on mine. You start by fixing what you did. For the first time in Tyler's adult life, there was nothing left for him to ask me for except mercy. 3 months later, Oak and Pine Living was finished as a business. There was no dramatic bankruptcy, no courtroom, no police at anyone's door. The company simply collapsed because the things it had been built around were never theirs to begin with. Without my duplex, my contractor contacts, my experience, and 20 unpaid hours of my week, the numbers stopped working. Tyler picked up Saturday shifts at his regular job. Courtney returned to full-time work instead of trying to make Oak and Pine her career. They sold most of the furniture they had bought for the business and moved from their expensive apartment into a smaller place across town. Mark did not forgive the loan. He did not destroy them over it either. They worked out a repayment schedule, and for once, Tyler made payments without calling me first. Nancy received every dollar of her $4,200 back. A few weeks later, Melissa, my property manager, called to tell me Nancy still wanted the duplex. This time, the paperwork had the correct owner on it. Nancy signed a legitimate lease, paid through the management company, and moved in with no surprises waiting for her. That felt better than revenge. Someone who had been dragged into our family mess finally got what she had honestly paid for. Courtney eventually sent a message to the relatives who had received her edited wedding clip. She included the full recording. She did not write a long apology. She simply admitted that the shorter video had left out what happened before I came out of the pool and that I had not canceled the property transfer over an innocent splash. Linda called me afterward. "I owe you an apology. You believed what you were shown. I should have asked you." "Yes," I said. "You should have." The old Bill might have rescued her from that discomfort. The new one let the truth sit where it belonged. One Saturday afternoon, I was driving home from the hardware store when I passed Tyler's new apartment complex. His SUV was parked near the curb. Tyler was halfway up the outside stairs carrying one end of an old wooden dresser. Courtney held the building door open while he maneuvered it around the railing. I slowed down without meaning to. For 1 second, I saw myself a few months earlier at the duplex, standing beside that cabinet and waiting for a son who never came. Tyler stopped on the landing, adjusted his grip, then kept climbing. He did not see me. I did not stop. The punishment was not poverty. They had jobs. They had a roof over their heads. They had food. The punishment was adulthood. They finally had to carry what belonged to them. Several weeks later, Tyler asked if I would meet him for coffee. I chose the diner where Mark and I had first compared what Tyler had told each of us. Tyler was already in a booth when I arrived. When the waitress came, he ordered coffee. Then he paid for both cups before I could reach for my wallet. It was a small thing, but I noticed it. For a while, he stared into his cup. Then he said, "I knew the deed wasn't transferred. I waited. I knew you hadn't agreed to oak and pine the way I told Courtney." He swallowed. "I told Mark you wouldn't back out because I knew you were afraid of losing me." That one still hurt. Tyler looked up. "I used that. Yes. I told myself it was okay because you were eventually going to give me the property anyway." He rubbed both hands together. "And when Courtney pushed you, I knew about your shoulder. I heard the bridesmaid. I said nothing. I cared more about keeping the wedding from becoming a scene than whether you were hurt." His voice dropped. "I'm sorry, Dad. Not just for the pool. For treating your property like mine. For treating your work like mine. For acting like your love meant you would always fix things. That was the apology I had needed. Not because it erased anything. Because it named what happened. I love you," I told him. His eyes filled. "But that doesn't put your name on my deed." He nodded. "I know. You don't borrow against me. You don't promise my time. You don't speak for me. And if you get yourself into financial trouble, you handle it. I understand. We did not hug in the parking lot and pretend everything was healed. Trust does not come back because someone finally says the right words." Tyler started calling once a week. Sometimes I answered. Sometimes I didn't. Courtney's road back was slower. She apologized, but I made no promises beyond civility and time. I wanted behavior, not speeches. By early fall, my shoulder was stronger. One afternoon, I stopped by the duplex while a younger contractor repaired a section of exterior trim. He looked down from his ladder. "Bill, you want to give me a hand with this?" For most of my life, the answer would have been yes before he finished asking. I looked at my shoulder, then at the brass duplex key in my hand. "No," I said. "You've got it." I walked back toward my truck with the brass key still in my hand. The duplex was still mine, but keeping it no longer felt like the part that mattered most. As I drove away from the duplex that afternoon, I realized the hardest lesson in all of this had nothing to do with property, money, or even the wedding. It was learning that love does not require surrender. For years, I thought being a good father meant fixing every problem before Tyler had to feel the weight of it. I told myself I was protecting him, but in truth, I was teaching him that consequences belonged to someone else. If I could go back, I would still help my son, but I would help him stand on his own feet instead of carrying him every time he stumbled. I would ask more questions before saying yes. I would put important promises in writing. I would never let guilt, grief, or fear of losing family become reasons to ignore disrespect, and I would not confuse forgiveness with permission. Family members can make mistakes, sometimes terrible ones, but real change begins only when people are allowed to face what their choices have caused. If someone you love keeps crossing your boundaries, do not wait until resentment destroys the relationship completely. Speak clearly. Protect your health, your time, your finances, and your dignity. Do not use money to buy peace, and do not sacrifice yourself just to keep everyone comfortable. You can love someone deeply and still say no. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop rescuing them long enough for them to finally grow up. I still loved my son. I just stopped proving it by disappearing.